There are some questions a mother asks because she is curious, and there are other questions she asks because something inside her already knows. The answer may hurt. I learned that difference one quiet evening when my son and I were sitting together, with nothing between us except 2 cups of tea and all the years we had lived side by side. He was older then, no longer the little boy who used to run into my room when thunder shook the windows. He had become a man who carried his own responsibilities, his own disappointments, his own memories. Yet when I looked at him that evening, I could still see the child who once placed a tiny blanket over my shoulders and told me, with complete seriousness, that he would protect me when he grew up. I watched him sitting by the window, looking outside without really seeing anything. The room was quiet. There was no music, no television, no distraction. Just the soft sound of the clock and the occasional passing car. I had been thinking about his life for a long time, about the people who had entered it, the people who had left it, and the pieces of himself he seemed to leave behind whenever someone he loved walked away. So I finally asked him the question that had been sitting inside my heart. I said, "My son, after everything you have experienced, what do you really believe about love?" He did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, and somehow before he spoke, I knew I was about to hear something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. He gave a small smile, but it was not a happy smile. Then he said, "Mom, I think love is beautiful. I just don't think it was meant for me." I felt something inside me break, not because he said he hated love, not because he was angry, but because he said it so calmly, as though he had already made peace with the idea that happiness belonged to other people. I stared at him, and for a moment I could not find the words of a mother. Every comforting sentence I had ever learned disappeared. I wanted to reach across the table and take his pain away the way I had taken away his childhood fears, but I knew I couldn't. Some wounds are too deep for a mother's hands, so I simply asked, "Why would you believe that?" He looked toward the window again. "I've loved people," he said. "I've cared. I've stayed when leaving would have been easier. I've forgiven things I probably shouldn't have forgiven. And every time I thought maybe this was the person I could build a life with, something happened. Eventually, I started wondering if maybe I was the problem." Those words hurt me more than I can explain, because I knew my son. I knew the boy he had been before the world taught him to be cautious. When he was little, he loved without calculation. If he saw another child sitting alone, he would go sit beside him. If someone dropped something, he would pick it up. If one of his friends was upset, he would quietly stay near them even if he didn't know what to say. He had always been sensitive, not weak, sensitive. There is a difference. A sensitive heart notices what other people ignore. It remembers the tremble in someone's voice. It notices when a smile is forced. It knows when "I'm fine" really means "please don't ask me again." My son had that kind of heart, and I sometimes wondered if that was both his greatest gift and his greatest burden. As he grew older, people admired his calmness. They saw a man who could stand in difficult situations without making noise. They saw someone who rarely complained, someone who tried to understand others before judging them. But I knew what they didn't see. They didn't see how deeply he felt things. They didn't see him sitting alone after a difficult conversation, replaying every word he had spoken. They didn't see him wondering whether he could have been kinder, more patient, more understanding. They didn't see the way he blamed himself for things that were never his responsibility. And they certainly didn't see the nights when heartbreak made him question whether opening his heart again was worth the risk. I remember one particular relationship that changed him. He had been happy, not loudly happy. My son was never the kind of person who needed to announce his happiness to the world, but I saw it. I saw it in the way he looked at his phone. I saw it when he came into the kitchen and smiled for no obvious reason. I saw it in the patience in his voice. One evening I teased him. "You're smiling at that phone like it has told you a wonderful secret." He laughed and put the phone down. "Maybe it has." I smiled because mothers notice these things. I didn't need to know every detail. I only needed to know that someone had brought light into my son's life, and for a while that light stayed. Then one day, I noticed he had become quiet again. I asked him what was wrong. "Nothing, Mom." I knew that answer. Every mother knows that answer. Nothing usually means everything. I didn't push him that evening. The next morning, he came into the kitchen, sat down and stared at his breakfast without touching it. I placed my hand over his. He looked at me. "It ended," he said. That was all. 2 words. But sometimes 2 words carry the weight of an entire chapter. I didn't ask who ended it. I didn't ask why. I simply held his hand. He looked down and whispered, "I really thought this one was different." I wanted to tell him that there would be someone else. I wanted to promise him that one day he would meet someone who would never leave, but I didn't. because I had learned that promises about another person's future are dangerous things. Instead, I told him something I hoped he would remember. I said, "My son, someone leaving you does not mean you were not worthy of being loved." He didn't answer. He just sat there, and I watched him fight tears he didn't want me to see. Years passed. He continued living. He worked. He laughed. He helped people. He showed up when friends needed him. He became even more compassionate. But something in him had changed. He became careful. He could care deeply without letting anyone see how deeply. He could love someone and still keep one part of himself standing near the exit. I noticed it. Of course I noticed it. A mother can recognize distance even when her child is sitting right beside her. That is why, on that evening when I asked him about love, his answer frightened me. "I don't think it was meant for me." I looked at him and said, "You don't really believe that?" He gave me a tired smile. "Maybe I do." "No," I said softly. "You believe you've been hurt." He looked at me. "That's not the same thing." For the first time that evening, he didn't have an answer. I continued, "You are not afraid of love. You're afraid of what love might cost you." His eyes lowered and I knew I had reached the place he had been hiding. He whispered, "Maybe." I squeezed his hand. "You've spent so much time thinking about what you gave to people," I said. "Have you ever stopped to ask what you deserve to receive?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he said something that broke my heart all over again. "I don't know what I deserve anymore. My son, my beautiful son." The man who had spent years making other people feel safe was sitting across from me wondering whether he deserved safety himself. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I wanted my voice to be steady because sometimes a mother has to become calm enough for her child to borrow her strength. I told him, "You deserve someone who doesn't make you question whether you are enough." He looked away. "You deserve someone who respects your quietness instead of punishing you for it." His eyes became wet. "You deserve someone who understands that loyalty isn't something to exploit." He swallowed. "And you deserve someone who doesn't make you feel guilty for having a heart." A tear finally rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly. I pretended not to notice. That was one of the hardest things I ever did as a mother. Sometimes love means wiping your child's tears. Sometimes love means pretending you didn't see them because you know they need dignity more than sympathy. I told him about something I had noticed when he was young. I said, "Do you remember when you were 8 and your friend broke your toy?" He smiled faintly. "I remember. You came home angry. I was very angry. You were furious. You told me you would never speak to him again." He laughed quietly. "I probably meant it." "You did. But the next afternoon you went back to his house." He nodded. "You told me he was lonely." I smiled. "You had every reason to stay angry, but you couldn't stand knowing someone you cared about was hurting." He looked at me. "That was a long time ago." "Yes," I said, "but you haven't changed as much as you think." He was quiet. I continued, "The world didn't make you kind. You were kind before you knew the world could hurt you." He looked down. "And I don't want heartbreak to convince you that your kindness was a mistake." That was the moment he finally cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly. The way grown men sometimes cry when they have spent too many years teaching themselves not to. I moved closer and held him. For a while, neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of all the things he had never told me, the disappointments, the goodbyes. The moments when he wanted to call someone and stopped himself. The nights when he wondered whether he should try again. The memories of people he had loved who had become strangers. I held my son the way I had held him when he was a child, and I realized something. A mother never really stops holding her child. The arms may change, the child may become taller, the voice may become deeper, the responsibilities may become heavier, but somewhere inside a mother, that child remains. And when he hurts, she remembers every version of him at once. I remembered his first heartbreak, his first dream, his first disappointment, his first time discovering that people don't always keep their promises. And I realized that perhaps my greatest responsibility was no longer protecting him from pain. I couldn't do that. No mother can. My responsibility was helping him understand that pain did not have to become his identity. So I told him, "My son, don't close the door because the wrong people walked through it." He smiled through his tears. "That's easier said than done. I know. I'm tired, Mom. I know. What if I give everything again and it ends the same way?" I took a breath. "Then you will survive it again." He looked at me. "But what if I don't want to survive anymore?" That question stopped me. I leaned closer. "You don't have to live only to survive." He was listening now. "You can live to discover. You can live to laugh. You can live to grow. You can live to love without demanding that love guarantee pay you a perfect future." He stayed silent, then I said, "Love is not a contract promising that you will never hurt. Love is a choice to remain honest, respectful, and present while life changes around you. I didn't know if he believed me. Maybe he didn't need to. Sometimes words are seeds. They don't have to bloom the moment they are planted. They only need to be placed somewhere inside the heart. After that evening, something subtle changed. Not immediately. My son didn't suddenly fall in love. He didn't wake up the next morning believing everything would be perfect. Healing doesn't happen like that. Instead, he began to speak differently. He stopped saying, "Love isn't for me." He started saying, "Maybe I haven't met the right kind of love yet." That small change meant everything to me, because hope does not always arrive like sunlight. Sometimes hope is nothing more than one sentence becoming less hopeless than the sentence before it. Months later, we were sitting together again. He told me about someone he had met. He didn't say much, but I saw the smile, that same quiet smile from years ago. I didn't tease him this time. I simply asked, "Does she make you feel peaceful?" He thought about it. "Yes." "Does she respect your heart?" "Yes." "Can you be yourself around her?" He smiled. "I think so." I nodded. "That is enough for now." He laughed. "You're not going to ask anything else?" "No." "Why?" "Because love needs room to breathe." He looked at me and smiled. And I understood that he was finally learning something I had wanted him to understand for years. The purpose of love is not to find someone who completes you. It is to meet someone who respects the person you have already become. My son didn't need someone to rescue him. He needed someone who wouldn't make him feel like he needed rescuing. He needed someone who could sit beside him in silence without interpreting silence as rejection. Someone who could disagree without humiliating him. Someone who could see his kindness without taking advantage of it. Someone who understood that loyalty is precious. Someone who knew that a gentle man is not a weak man. And most importantly, he needed to learn that love should never require him to abandon himself. I don't know what the future will bring him. No mother does. I cannot promise that his heart will never break again. I cannot promise that every relationship will last. I cannot promise that the person he loves today will be the person standing beside him many years from now. But I can promise him something else. I will always remind him who he is. When the world tells him he isn't enough, I will remind him of the boy who always noticed the lonely person in the room. When heartbreak tells him to become cold, I will remind him that compassion was never his weakness. When disappointment tells him to stop believing in people, I will remind him that one person's betrayal does not define humanity. When fear tells him to close his heart, I will remind him that a locked heart cannot be wounded, but it also cannot experience the fullness of love. And when he forgets that he is worthy of being loved, I will tell him again and again and again, because that is what mothers do. We repeat the truths our children sometimes forget. I still think about that evening when I asked him one question about love. I thought I was asking about romance. I thought I was asking whether he still believed in finding someone. But I was really asking something much deeper. I was asking whether my son still believed that his own heart was worthy of happiness. And when he answered, "I don't think love was meant for me," I realized how much pain he had been carrying silently. His answer broke my heart. But it also gave me a gift. It allowed me to see the wound beneath the strength. It allowed me to sit beside my son not as someone trying to fix him, but as someone willing to listen. And perhaps that is what love truly is. Not always fixing, not always advising. Sometimes simply staying. Sometimes holding someone's hand while they find their way back to themselves. If my son ever hears me tell this story, I hope he knows that I never saw his heartbreak as a failure. I saw it as proof that he had dared to care. I saw every disappointment not as evidence that he was foolish, but as evidence that he had been brave enough to open a door, and I hope he never becomes ashamed of that bravery, because the world sometimes teaches men to hide their tenderness. It tells them not to cry, not to admit fear, not to say they were hurt, not to care too much. But I have watched my son grow, and I know this. His tenderness is one of the strongest things about him. His ability to forgive without becoming bitter, his ability to love without demanding applause. His ability to help people without asking what they can give him in return. Those qualities are not weaknesses. They are the fingerprints of a beautiful soul. And if love comes to him again, I hope he doesn't approach it like a battlefield. I hope he approaches it like a garden, with patience, with honesty, with care, understanding that beautiful things require attention, understanding that trust is built slowly, understanding that two imperfect people can still create something meaningful when they choose respect over pride and understanding over fear. And if love does not come immediately, I hope he doesn't mistake waiting for rejection. There is nothing wrong with being alone while you are becoming whole. There is nothing tragic about a quiet season. Sometimes the heart needs solitude, not because it has been forgotten, but because it is learning what it truly needs. I told my son once, never choose someone simply because you are afraid of being alone. He looked at me and said, "What if being alone hurts?" I said, "Then let it hurt. Loneliness is painful, but losing yourself inside the wrong relationship can hurt even more." He remembered those words. I know because years later he repeated them to me. And when he did, I realized something wonderful. Perhaps mothers do not always know whether their words have reached their children. Sometimes they sit quietly inside them for years. Then one day, when the child has grown into a man, he gives those words back to you, and you realize he was listening all along. So now, whenever I think about that question I asked him, I no longer remember only the heartbreak in his answer. I remember the beginning of his healing. Because sometimes the saddest answer can become the doorway to the most important conversation. My son once believed love was not meant for him. Now I think he understands something different. Love was never something he had to earn by suffering. He never had to prove his worth by giving everything away. He never had to become someone else to deserve tenderness. He only had to remain himself, the kind man, the loyal man, the quiet man, the man who feels deeply. The man who has been hurt and still chooses not to become cruel. And if there is one thing I want my son to remember for the rest of his life, it is this. Do not let the people who failed to love you properly convince you that you are difficult to love. Do not let a goodbye rewrite your entire story. Do not let heartbreak make you ashamed of the heart that loved. And never ever believe that because someone could not see your value, you had none. You were worthy before they arrived. You were worthy while they stayed. And you will remain worthy if they leave. I am his mother. I cannot choose who will love him. I cannot protect his heart from every goodbye. I cannot walk every road beside him. One day I may only be a memory he carries quietly inside himself. But if that day comes, I hope he remembers this conversation. I hope he remembers me sitting across from him, holding his hand, telling him that his heart was not broken beyond repair. I hope he remembers that I believed in his capacity to love even when he didn't. And I hope, wherever life takes him, he understands that my greatest wish was never simply for him to find a wife or a partner. My greatest wish was for him to find peace within himself. Because when a person finally understands his own worth, love stops being a desperate search for someone to complete him. It becomes a beautiful choice. A choice to share an already meaningful life. A choice to give without disappearing. A choice to trust without losing wisdom. A choice to remain gentle without becoming defenseless. And perhaps that is the answer I was really looking for that evening. Not whether my son believed in love, but whether, after everything he had endured, he still believed in himself. And today, when I look into his